Some of you may remember when Alan Bloom wrote The Closing of the American Mind. It was a bestseller in the 1980s, and it was a bestseller because it was at the dawn of affirmative action on campus. And Bloom came from the classical left, not the Marxist left, but he was a classically educated scholar. And he wrote about the danger to democracy posed by affirmative action regimes on campus, which suppressed the search for excellence in the academic world and replaced it with what we now know as political correctness. In the beginning of Bloom's book, The Closing of the American Mind, he begins where the Western mind begins, in the search for truth. In contrast to earlier generations, students educated from the 1970s were taught that truth is relative. By 2006, when I was teaching at university, we had moved on from the postmodern 1990s. Truth was no longer regarded as relative, it was regarded as offensive. Within a few years, the giving of offence, that is, the telling of truth, became a cardinal sin in the university, and the taking of offence a cardinal virtue. But only some groups are allowed to enjoy the virtue of being offended by truth. They are protected under the PC state. They are called minorities, but they are not genuine minorities at all. Unlike the genuine minority groups of communist and Islamist states, those given special privileges and protections in the 21st century West enjoy equal and often greater rights under law than their fellow citizens. Affirmative action policy offers them privileged places in education and employment. They are offered a range of special benefits under welfare, health and housing schemes, and the state shields them from words that might offend by encoding anti-free speech provisions in discrimination legislation, such as 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. I want you to consider how chaotic PC has made Western culture and society. Consider 2017. It's been a peak year for political correctness. If condensed into a working week, the schedule might read, on Monday, refugee activists demand open borders in the democratic West while ignoring closed borders in the societies of Islam and communism that just happen to produce the refugees that we have to deal with by the million. On Tuesday, rainbow warriors usher in the age of love by decking dissenters. On Wednesday, black supremacists march against racism. On Thursday, women protest sexism by demanding special rights for the vagina vanguard. On Friday, jihadis celebrate the religion of peace by blowing up infidels. Each of these groups feels justified to rage against democracy, freedom of speech and universal equality because they benefit from state privileges and protections. The PC state has made them feel utterly entitled to be a privileged minority in the West. They know that they have a right to special privileges, they know that they have a special right to freedom of speech, and they use it to deny those rights to others. Minority politics might help some people genuinely in need, but it is primarily an expression of codified bigotry against the only group wholly excluded from its benefits, white, heterosexual Christian men. Western minority groups are protected by a system of privilege used principally to achieve political objectives designed a century ago. Minority groups are used as a political instrument to bring about a PC order. The roots of the politics go back to the world's first proto-totalitarian state under the Bolshevik communists. But the modern strategy was designed by the forefather of neo-Marxism, or what we know as minority politics, Herbert Marcuse. When I use the term political correctness in the 21st century, when we use it now, we're referring to the ideology of neo-Marxism, Marcuse's ideology. So what is it? What is it that's dominating the West and innovating it? Last year marked the 50th anniversary of the odious treatise that produced the modern left, Marcuse's repressive tolerance. Marcuse advocated that the left should cultivate what he called a radical minority that would come to power by grasping the weapon of free speech, using it to censor conservatives and drive dissenters from public life. Marx's dictatorship of the proletariat was transformed into what I call the dictatorship of the minoritariat. Neo-Marxists advocate revolutionary socialism as method, led by a new proletariat class, radical minorities, and they began their revolution on campus in America. The revolution on campus began with scapegoating, isolating and purging classical and conservative thinkers from universities, and then deepened into the curriculum where Western civilization was erased. So we had Jesse Jackson, once a civil rights leader, leading a march from Stanford University shouting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western civ has got to go." A study of American public universities showed that in 1964, 82% of public universities offered Western civilization as a sequence. By 2010, it was 10%. 82% to 10%. That's how effective the neo-Marxist march across the Western university has been. The extraordinary success of this ideology is measurable by its absolute penetration of popular culture, law, and major public institutions such as state schools, universities, and the media. Discrimination law, affirmative action law, the system of state privileges for so-called minority groups, and their exclusive protection from offensive words under Western and international law are rooted in neo-Marxist ideology. Some of these, if you want to know what the minority groups are in any country, you look at discrimination legislation and under what's commonly called the attributes. So these are the protected attributes. Commonly listed attributes include race or ethnicity, birth, sex, disability, carer status sometimes, and sexual activity or sexual orientation. In universities, I worked for several years as a manager of equity and diversity. So I understand this area intimately, and it's quite common to find additional attributes such as gender identity and physical features, usually being fat, religious belief or activity, criminal record, breastfeeding, personal association with a person who is identified by reference to any of the above attributes. Now, to my mind, there are only two, maybe three groups that deserve special protection under law. They're people with disabilities and their carers, also carers for the chronically ill, and people who are living in entrenched poverty. But I know that will be debated, the last one probably. Look, if these laws were applied to university, they might be considered basically fair, but they'd also be wholly unnecessary. But this neo-Marxism, this ideology is not a revolution only against freedom, but against equality itself. It's destroyed the left. The new left of Marcuse's world departed from the idea of universal equality, that is, equal treatment before the law and equal opportunity to realise individual potential. So it diverged from the civil rights movements of the 1960s that were really working towards equal treatment for all citizens before the law. Marcuse had a new equation for equality, which was, and I quote, "not equal, but more representation of the left." The old standard of universal equality was superseded by a new formula to force the right into political oblivion by engineering the over-representation of left-approved minorities across public institutions. Media, academia and politics were all targets of the new left's doublethink formula for social justice: equality equals inequality. This absolute corruption of the principle of equality means in practice that groups the left classifies as structurally oppressed have access to special consideration and better benefits under the law. The Australian Human Rights Commission describes these special measures, and I quote again, "Special measures can only be taken when they are needed, so that a disadvantaged racial group can enjoy their human rights equally with others. Equality does not always mean treating people the same. There are two types of equality: formal equality and substantive equality. Formal equality is treating everyone the same. Substantive equality allows different groups to be treated differently, so that they can, in the end, enjoy their human rights equally. Special measures are designed to achieve substantive equality." And they cite a judge just to back up their indefensible position. "In order to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race." Really? There is no other way. Now listen to this. "And in order to treat some persons equally, we must treat them differently." Let me just paraphrase. In order to treat people equally, we must treat them unequally. Equality equals inequality. It's pure doublespeak. The first commandment of PC culture is 2 + 2 = 5. Equality equals inequality. Doublespeak is the native tongue of the PC state. The cornerstone of PC culture is lies, falsehood, the politically correct, stage-managed lie that ideology is truth. The Bolsheviks developed the prototype of the 21st century PC state. It was genocidal, totalitarian, and oppressed particularly Europeans by using quotas to exclude them from education and employment. In the affirmative action empire, historian Terry Martin traces the introduction of quotas in communist states. As in the West today, they were reserved for certain minority groups. Martin gives examples from Eastern Soviet republics where communist quotas protected Central Asian populations by reserving 70% of university places for nationals, 20% for minorities, and 10% for Europeans. He looks at this system of affirmative action created by the murderous, genocidal communists, and he observes that across the Soviet republics, a lack of concern for Russians and other Western nationalities in particular. So in short, the first PC state used affirmative action to introduce the structural oppression of Westerners. And then, discrimination against European people is classified as positive discrimination under law. While the Bolsheviks introduced political correctness as state policy, it took Mao Zedong to perfect it as a weapon of culture. And for those of you who don't know, Mao Zedong killed around 50 million Chinese to create the perfect communist state. And Xi Jinping is now reigniting the culture wars in China. Mao Zedong fashioned education in particular as a cultural weapon to bring about the rise of the totalitarian state. The term political correctness derives in part from Mao's writing on correct thought. Censorship of the Western mind, that is classical liberal and conservative thought, was an obsession of Mao's. He knew that a totalitarian state could not be made manifest until the Western mind was destroyed. Censorship of ideologically incorrect thought was central to his PC policy of censorship. He wrote, "What should our policy be towards non-Marxist ideas? As far as saboteurs of the socialist cause are concerned, the matter is easy. We simply deprive them of their freedom of speech." The same method is used today to punish dissenters under Section 18 of the Racial Discrimination Act. In Zedong's revolutionary colleges, political correctness was inculcated by a pedagogical method known as thought reform. The method used to enforce PC ideology in the 21st century West bears a marked resemblance to Maoist pedagogy. It is institutionalised in schools, universities, the publicly funded media and activist networks. Scholars identified several distinctive phases in the thought reform process, but I draw your attention to Shine in particular. He identified the three distinct stages as 1, unfreezing, and that is the unfreezing of established beliefs and attitudes not aligned with Marxism. The second stage is called changing, which is a process of transformation. And the third stage is called refreezing, which is refreezing the person in according to the politically correct party line and the politically correct ideas of the state. Shine also emphasised that the stimulation of guilt, mass guilt, was critical to the success of the initial stage of thought reform, unfreezing, because a person has to be made to feel as though they're doing something very wrong to accept that they must reject the knowledge and the traditions and so forth with which they grew up. Social guilt is also quite common today. It's used, it's observable on social media, where guilt is used really to reinforce mob thought, mob PC thought, and to take down dissenters from that thought. In the literature on Maoist thought reform, students were required to unlearn what they knew before being indoctrinated with correct thought, that is Marxism. For PC ideology to take, learned citizens have to unlearn. Which brings me to 2017 Australia. The University of Sydney launched its Great Unlearning, what I would call Great Unlearning program. the University of Sydney launched an education campaign called Unlearning. Its dedicated webpage included a description of what unlearning will involve. It read, and I quote, "Throughout our lives, we're taught important lessons. We learn how to talk, to write, even how to behave. But not everyone has been taught how to unlearn. To be brave enough to question the world, challenge the established, demolish social norms, and build new ones in their place." Let's just compare this for a moment, just an exercise in curiosity, to the three-stage process of communist thought reform. Stage 1, unfreezing, University of Sydney. But not everyone has been taught how to unlearn. Stage 2, changing and transformation, University of Sydney. To be brave enough to question the world, challenge the established, demolish social norms. Stage 3, refreezing, University of Sydney, and build new social norms in their place. Just when you think it can't get worse, the university specifies that as a part of this program, students will unlearn truth. I mean, that is outrageous. That is bloody outrageous. So how did we get here? In a century, the hard left has eroded the foundations of free society by attacking Western civilization's unique method of discovering truth. Instead of learning how to test assumptions or hypotheses to distinguish fact from fiction, students are taught that PC ideology is truth. Academics and students who refuse to hold the PC party line are punished badly for it. What does it mean to have a Western mind? What makes a mind categorically Western? By extension, what kind of thought transforms an empty space or building into a university? The university has survived wars and revolutions as a beacon of truth and liberty, a standard bearer that shapes the manners and minds of youth so that they grow to become citizens capable of cultivating the constitution of liberal democracy. Western universities have played a critical role in the development of the demos and the core values that power its perpetuity: liberty, universal equality, and our common humanity. In short, the Western mind searches for discoverable, objective truth. But what makes the Western mind so distinctive is the method we use to distinguish truth. Philosopher Roger Scruton provides 4 general criteria for our journey to discover truth. 1, in asserting a proposition, making a judgment, etc., we aim at truth. Our aim is truth. It's not ideology, it's not political correctness, it's not to please the person next to you, it's not to clickbait, it's not to get likes on social media. We aim at truth. Secondly, our judgments are not simply true because we decide to call them true. Right? 3, whatever is true has conditions for truth, conditions whose fulfilment confers truth upon it. And 4, a true proposition is consistent with every other true proposition. No truth is contradicted by another, Aristotle. These guideposts illuminate the path of logic towards objective truth, and once upon a time they served as the epistemological architecture of scholarly inquiry. Logic shows us that truth about the old scientific method shows us that truth about the natural world is as plain as the nose on your face. Thank you, Shakespeare. It is used to discern truth, abandon fallacy, and by so doing, advance the cause of human progress. However, since the 1960s, the once rational bent of the Western left has been eroded by successive phases of deconstructionists and neo-Marxists. Truth is no longer just relative, it is irrelevant and forbidden. Writing during the most violent period of the neo-Marxist colonisation of the Western University, sociologist Robert Nisbet opined, "I do not see how the university can conceivably fulfil the mission of detached scholarship, of objective study of ideas and values, within circumstances such as those prevailing at the present time. On the importance of depoliticisation, there can be no question. Survivors of communist China say the same thing. You must depoliticise education. It is the first step towards a communist state, politicised education, or a totalitarian state. You must depoliticise it." Yet almost 50 years after Nisbet urged the depoliticisation of the university, it is riven with political correctness. On PC culture and the closing of the Western mind, I can find no clearer example than the life and death of Bill Leak. Leake was Australia's most brilliant and irreverent illustrator. He was a radical freethinker. He worshipped at the altar of truth. He died of a heart attack following years of persecution by jihadists and the Western PC establishment. After Islamists murdered Charlie Hebdo artists, Leake drew a cartoon of Muhammad. Jihadists threatened to kill him, forcing him into police protection. In 2016, PC minorities, encouraged to complain by the Australian Human Rights Commission, falsely accused Leake of racism under the notorious gag law 18C. The hate left persecuted him for months. The PC censors mobbed him on social media. They smeared him on the taxpayer-funded ABC. Taxpayer-funded legal aid lawyers incited people to falsely accuse him under 18C. And the taxpayer-funded Human Rights Commission asked people to submit complaints about his politically incorrect cartoon. The Green Left joined with their media proxies to bully Leake mercilessly. Ethnic chauvinist groups, minorities, joined the witch hunt too. By August 2016, hunting Bill Leake was a PC blood sport. It was vicious, merciless and devoid of reason. During the final months of his life, as he was persecuted under Section 18C, Bill spoke of how stressed he was and how hard it was to sleep. He said, "Jen, the process really is the punishment." After Bill died, I thought things would change. Labor, the Greens and various minority groups would realise that 18C was a tool now for the persecution of free thinkers. They would at least reform it, at least. Well, things have changed, but not for the better. Labor and the Greens went on the offensive after Bill died, calling anyone who dissented from PC censorship bigots and racists. Labor plans to extend 18C to more minority groups, including, I think it's nationalism or national state origin, i.e. refugee groups, and sexuality, sexual orientation. The abject cruelty of the PC mob in the wake of Bill Leake's death revealed to me, at least, that they will never stop. They are totalitarian by nature and liars by creed. I believe that the final closing of the Western mind will occur in a post-censorship age, and that we are now entering that age. I think that the post-censorship age will be defined by a significant transition in which censorship of politically incorrect speech is replaced by the enforcement of politically correct speech. We are entering the final transition from the Western mind to the totalitarian PC mind, the transition from free speech to forced speech. Already, state universities, media and the public sector are demanding forced speech. The particular neo-Marxist minority fashioned as a weapon to close the American mind is irrelevant, but the two contenders at the moment are race and queer politics or sexual orientation. The Northern Territory Labor government has introduced a paper suggesting gender replaced sex as an attribute in discrimination law. We are to accept the great PC myth of transgenderism, which is rooted in the ideology of queer. Queer politics is the application of neo-Marxism to the sphere of sex and sexuality. In the past week, for example, a Canadian teacher's assistant was dobbed into faculty by her students. Lindsay Shepherd's sin was to remain neutral when a professor argued against the use of transgender pronouns such as Z instead of she or he. For her sin of not denouncing biological truth and stating instead a PC lie, Shepherd had to attend a meeting with academics and a bureaucrat from the university's diversity office. On my count, the meeting was 3-on-1, and before too long, the three of them had her in tears. She had no idea why she was being punished, so the diversity bloke, Joel, helpfully explained. Gendered violence doesn't just include sexual violence, but it also includes targeting folks based on gender, so that includes transphobia, biphobia, homophobia. All those sorts of things that are protected under the policy, and so those are things that Laurier's upheld as values, as well as the Ontario Human Rights Code. And so those are things that we're responsible for, not impacting our students in that way and not spreading transphobia in that way. Well, Shepherd's understandably confused by the nonsense and says, I didn't target anybody. Who did I target? Joel. Trans folks? Later on, after a punishing exercise in circular logic, Diversity Man comes back to claim she's violated some policy or another. Shepherd asks, what exactly did I violate in that policy? He responds, so gender-based violence, transphobia in that policy, causing harm to trans students by bringing their identity as invalid or their pronouns as invalid, potentially invalid. Now, if you know what that means, help me along, but the crucial thing here, and there it is, the crucial thing here is that in the 21st century university, truth is categorised as a form of harm because it harms liars, because it harms the PC state. The core constituents of the PC world are harmed when truth is told to them because it exposes that they're living a lie. The truth enlightens, it civilises, it drives human progress. A university that bans truth by punishing it is not a university. It is not a descendant of Plato's Academy. It is a descendant of Mao Zedong's Revolutionary College. It is a categorical error to classify the 21st century Western university as a university. It doesn't matter in the end which state anointed minority is used to bring about the fall of Western civilization for the base culture of political correctness. What matters is our resistance to it, what might be called the Veritas Resistance. So let me begin the resistance. Bill Leak was not racist, safe schools are unsafe, PC equality is codified bigotry, European Christian conservatives built the world's greatest civilization, and an inverted penis does not a woman make. If you want a post-colonial country, hand in your phones, smash your computers and TVs, bulldoze the university and toss out your toilet, give back God, your antibiotics, soap and running water, forget the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, Mozart, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, Shakespeare, Walt Whitman, democracy, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, newspapers, cars, aeroplanes, movies, jeans, and switch off the electricity on your way back to the cave. Western civilization is the fruit of the Western mind. We must not allow them to put out the light of the world. We will not go gently into that eternal night.